Your business is constrained by exactly one thing. That is not your offer, not your market, not your team, not your funnels. It's your biological capacity to manage it. Everything else, strategy, product, hiring, sales, is downstream of that single variable. Your biology, specifically your brain and nervous system, decides how much of the strategy you execute, how quickly you iterate on your offer, and how much outreach you do. In other words, any business output is capped by the founder's capacity, always. And this is the most under-discussed law in business. And if you're a founder working all day but barely moving forward, the problem isn't that you don't know how to move forward. You can list the 2 to 3 things that, if executed, would help you break through. Maybe it is a new offer. Maybe it's more outreach. Maybe it's a few strategic hires or a hard conversation with your partner or someone in your team. You know exactly what to do. You know the thing or few things that you should be doing, but you're actively avoiding. And you've been told that if you avoid these things, it means you have a discipline problem or a mindset problem or a motivation problem. Wrong. The real reason is a specific, measurable, biological ceiling inside your school. And until you train it, every other lever you pull will under-deliver. Now, this doesn't mean you're weak. You're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. It just means you are untrained. And that's actually great news for you. I'm León Castillo, investor in 38 startups, professor at University, and the founder of Selfmastered. Since 2020, I've trained and mentored hundreds of founders in what I call neuroexecution, the science of training the brain and nervous system to consistently execute hard, high-leverage work without procrastination, self-doubt, or burnout. And it works great. The average 6-figure founder who runs their protocol for 12 weeks straight grows their revenue by 2.7 times while reclaiming around 15 hours a week. And we don't fix the strategy, we don't fix the offer, and we don't fix their team. We train the founder under all three. And what's most important, that almost every founder we work with had elite skills, elite knowledge, and elite strategy before we started. They were smart, they were still stuck. Because skills, knowledge, strategy, they do not execute themselves. You need the capacity to execute, which requires a brain, a nervous system ready and able to handle stress, uncertainty, and risk. And the human brain by default isn't ready. Now, this is not a theory I read in a book. This is something I discovered the hard way after an accident that nearly killed me. 7 years ago, I was arguably the fastest growing finance professional in Spain. At 27, I was a broke architect. At 29, I was a private equity real estate investment director. I achieved a professional transition that typically takes 10 to 15 years in just 30 months and got a couple of nationwide awards for that. But then, on October 26, 2019, I woke up in a hospital bed. I've had a bike accident the night before. The paramedics found me unconscious on a street near my house in downtown Madrid. I didn't remember what had happened because I was concussed, but I still vividly recall thinking that everything could have ended right then and there. So back home, while bedridden, I realized that I had to take a chance to build a business I've always wanted to build, but I was too afraid to start. A business that I had been dreaming of for years. So I quit my job. And at 31, I went back to my parents' house to start working on that business. And then I couldn't do anything. My brain wouldn't cooperate. I'd sit down at my desk in the morning with a clear to-do list, and then I wouldn't do anything meaningful. I procrastinated on the most basic tasks and called it research. I try to focus, but I'd get distracted within just a few minutes. Or I will second guess every decision I made. I doubted myself constantly. It took me 6 months to build something I could have built in a month. The question I sat with for months, the question I know every founder I've worked with is sitting with is, why can't I do what I know I need to do? The concussion and later the recovery showed me something that I couldn't ignore. That getting things done, execution, is not a function of mindset, discipline, environment, or luck. Execution is downstream of biological capacity. And after my accident, my brain and nervous system wasn't just not ready to execute on a new business. I wanted to do it, but I couldn't do it. So I had to relearn how to actually show up. And luckily, I did it the right way. I started tracking my work, training my attention and focus, reading neuroscience papers, hiring coaches and mentors, and I proved to myself that I wasn't broken. I learned that the capacity to execute is not a God-given gift, but a trainable skill. And until it is trained, it is the ceiling on everything that you do in life. And what I'm gonna show you in this video is the mechanism. And if you spend years or decades in self-help purgatory trying to piece together a way to show up every day at peak capacity and you couldn't find it or couldn't sustain it, I've recorded this for you. Because here's what shouldn't be happening to you. You're smart, you work hard, you've read the books, taken the courses, watched the videos. By every visible metric, you should be unstoppable in the pursuit of your goals. Yet, you and I both know we are not operating at the level you know you can. You feel stuck even if you are moving. Somewhere between efforts and results, something is leaking. Every day, there are tasks undone from yesterday, fires popping up today, and a smell of smoke coming from tomorrow. You work 10 hours and only 2 or 3 are truly productive. You're wasting precious time that won't ever come back. You know this. You've known it for years. You've explained it to yourself a dozen different ways. Maybe it's a bad week, a weird month, growing pains, season of chaos. It's really none of those. It's the same problem every day that nobody has named for you because really they don't benefit from you knowing exactly what's going on. There's a whole industry that profits from your stuckness. There's a $50 billion industry built around helping founders become successful. Sells you courses, masterminds, retreats, coaching, productivity system, mindset programs, morning routines, you name it. And it has been selling them to you for years. You implemented some of them, but most faded after just 3 days. And those are the ones you actually finished. None of those move the needle much. The industry says this is a you problem. That if these things don't work, it's because you haven't made them work. You didn't apply them hard enough. You didn't believe in it enough. You weren't ready to actually get that going. That's the lie. And that's why you're stuck. Because this industry is selling you fixes for the wrong layers. And there's 3 flavors of the same lie that dominate the market. And you've been sold all 3. The first lie is what I call the strategy lie. The high ticket coaching world, the $50,000 masterminds, the offer consultant, the funnel engineering crowd tells you the answer to getting unstuck is a better playbook. It is a better offer, better funnel, better positioning, better script. They tell you you're only one funnel away, one offer away. So you buy it and you implement half of it. And the other half sits in a school community gathering digital dust. The strategy lie assumes that if you knew exactly what to do, you'd actually do it. And that assumption explains nothing about why a smart founder who already knows what to do can get the most important thing done. There's a second lie, which I call the hustle lie. Those are the gurus that tell you to hustle, to grind, to suffer through your work. They tell you business is hard, life is a bitch, and the only solution is to outrun that pain through relentless hustle. That answer always seems to be more effort. Most of that hustle goes into work that doesn't matter. Distraction dressed up as productivity. Grinding dressed as execution. The hardest working founders you know are typically also the most stuck. Because grinding feels like winning, but it isn't. Hustling with a trained brain reliably produces one outcome: feeling miserable and eventually burning out and quitting. And the third lie is what I call the mindset lie. See, the personal development industry, the shouting gurus, the affirmation and vision board complex, they tell you the bottleneck is your beliefs. So you read the books, journal, you did meditation, you did all sorts of things they told you to do to get into the right headspace for you to get the results you thought you deserve. You even went to seminars, to retreats, and they worked for, again, about 72 hours. But then you went back to grinding, to feeling miserable, to daydreaming about escaping the prison you're in. Because the problem is that execution and motivation is an output of capacity. It's not an input to it. When your brain is well trained and capacity is built, motivation appears as a side effect. When the brain is untrained and capacity is unbuilt, no amount of motivational input produces it. In other words, you cannot think your way into execution. The same way you can't journal your way into focus. You can't affirm your way past the nervous system that's running on fumes. Those 3 lies, the strategy lie, the hustle lie, and the mindset lie, rest on one assumption: that the founder's performance is a software problem. Fix the beliefs, the strategy, the willpower, and the output changes. It's never a software problem. It's always a hardware problem. And nobody's selling you the hardware fix because it's harder to package, slower to deliver, but impossible to fake. But it's the only long-term solution that works forever. Now, this hardware problem isn't your fault. You didn't choose it, but it is your responsibility because it is capping your business. Every business is founder constrained, which means that the founder is always responsible for setting the vision, the standards, and the culture. The founder decides how much risk to take. The founder decides how the strategy gets executed. The founder sets the culture that the team follows. The founder makes the decision when problems arise at 11 p.m. and there's nobody else to make that decision. And every external constraint, the offer, the market, hiring, capital, timing, everything gets filtered through the founder's brain and nervous system before it becomes action. In other words, the founder is the operator, and the operator's biology is the upstream variable from which everything else flows. This means something very specific. Every problem you've been blaming on the market, the offer, the team, the timing, everything collapses in one location: your brain. The brain that is running your company. And there's no path that bypasses your brain and your nervous system. If you upgrade those, the whole company improves. And if you don't upgrade it, regardless of how good the strategy is, you won't get where you want to go. Now, I'm not saying strategy doesn't matter. It does matter. Your offer matters, your team matters, the market matters, but all of them are downstream of your biological capacity to manage it. So here's the obvious question. If the brain is the constraint, why does almost every founder hit the same ceiling? Why is this experience universal? Well, because of how our brain is wired, because of our biological defaults. The brain you're operating with did not evolve to do what you're asking it to do. It evolved to keep a primate alive in an environment where the threats were physical, the time horizons were short, and the right answer to ambiguity was to run, fight, or freeze. You are not in that environment anymore. You're running a business. The threats are abstract. Time horizons are quarterly or yearly, and the right answer to ambiguity is to sit with it, think clearly, and execute the hardest task on your list while uncertain about the outcome. And your brain is not adapted for this role. It was never going to be. In fact, under stress, uncertainty, and risk, guess what it does? It literally shies away from those things. That's the default condition of a human brain when running a business. Every time it faces these things, it activates the threat response circuit. It floods you with stress hormones. It weakens the prefrontal network, which is the thinking part of the brain that hold the context and decision-making of the day. It also shrinks your time horizon. It pulls you towards whatever feels safe and away of whatever feels ambiguous. It triggers the precise behaviors that cap founder growth. And that's why you get procrastination that eats your workday, self-doubt that kills your decision, distraction that fragments your focus, and burnout that turns ambition into exhaustion. And you've been told that if you procrastinate, doubt yourself, get distracted, or burn out, you're weak. You're not weak. You're not undisciplined. You're just not built for this. You're running a default software in an environment it wasn't designed for, and the output is exactly what the software predicts. The amygdala, which is the fear center of the brain, cannot distinguish between a predator and a client churning. The stress response that kept you alive in a physical threat environment is the same one firing when your top client goes quiet for 3 days. And it's running the show, whether you've read 40 books on stoicism or you haven't. So if you're currently stuck, burning your day on distractions, procrastination, doubt, second guessing, you don't need to push harder against the software. That never works. You need to retrain it. Now, this might sound new, but it is not new. Every other high-performance discipline figured this out decades ago. Athletes, for instance, they don't just complete, they train. With coaches, with data, with periodized program, with sports psychologists and recovery protocols. Competition is 1% of the work. The other 99 is, you guessed it, training. Or special operators, armed forces. They don't randomly deploy in far-flung deserts. They train for years first. They get stress inoculation, cognitive load drills, slave architecture, nutrition, breathwork. They do all sorts of things to get ready for that test. It also happens to surgeons, fighter pilots, elite musicians, world-class chess players. Every domain that requires sustained performance under stress has spent decades developing the science of training their best operators. Every domain except business. Founders like you and me, we compete every single day to increase revenue. Yet, nobody told us we needed to train. So what do? We read books as if reading about our mission actually represents the actual work. Or we listen to podcasts, as if another person curated collection of anecdotes could help us improve. Or we buy courses, as if carefully packaged information bore any resemblance to doing the work. Now, all of these can be informational and certainly entertaining, but they're not training. Training is structured repetition under stress with measurement and feedback. Almost no founder is doing any of that for the system that is most important for their business, which is their brain. And the reason you might be stuck is not that you're weak or stupid. No, it's that you're competing without training. And that's the key idea of this video. Because you must learn to train yourself like every other high performance operator. And it all hinges on the fact that your brain is trainable. Your nervous system is trainable. The capacity to execute under stress is trainable. Yet, in business, almost nobody trains it. That's the gap. That's the entire opportunity. That is why I'm sharing this with you in this video. Because the founders who figure this out don't win because they're smarter. No, they win because they are trained to execute relentlessly on the hardest task every single day until they succeed. And you're not yet, because you soon will be. Now, if you're stuck, you have two gaps. One is visible, but one isn't. The visible gap is what I call the execution gap. It's the delta between what you said you'd do this week and what you actually got done. The task you didn't ship, the conversation you didn't have, the outreach you didn't send, the call you didn't make or take. That's the gap. Every decision you've been spinning on for days or weeks. That execution gap shows on your calendar. You're painfully aware of it. You see it. Your team see it. Your partners and investors also see it. And your revenue suffers it. That's the gap that you've been trying to close for years through time boxing, Pomodoro, time tracking, random systems, built on Claude, Notion, whatever. Now, sometimes there's no gap. You truly get things done at the highest level. But most days, it comes back. Most days, you operate at about 30% of your capacity. And that's because the execution gap is a symptom. It's not a cause. Underneath the execution gap sits the capacity gap, which is a gap you can't see. The capacity gap is the structural delta between what your brain and nervous system can currently sustain and what your business actually demands from you. And it is invisible. It doesn't show up on your calendar. It shows up on how many hours of hard, high leverage work you can sustain, in the quality of your sleep, in the numbers of high-stake decisions you can make in a day before your brain feels mush, and how long it takes you to recover from a bad day or a bad week. And it's a gap nobody has been measuring, but it's the one that is actually keeping you stuck. And this capacity gap goes deep. In fact, it has 3 layers. Layer number 1 is skills, what your brain can actually do, the patterns you recognize, the things you can do, the decisions you're comfortable making without second-guessing yourself. Because at the root, skills are brain pathways. You build them through structured repetition, the way a bodybuilder builds muscle. Then there's a second layer, which are the beliefs, what your brain and nervous system treat as true. Not what you consciously think is true, but what you subconsciously accept as fact, what you flinch at and you don't, what you find unthinkable and what you actually believe in. And beliefs are conditioned association encoded in the limbic system of the brain. They govern behavior whether your conscious mind agrees with them or not. And finally, we have the behaviors, what you default to under stress. When you're tired, underfed, dysregulated, what do you do when you are not perfectly primed for that? In other words, behaviors are deep-rooted defaults. And at any time, you, me, and Elon Musk, we have a capacity gap between what we know, believe, and do, and what we need to know, believe, and do to take ourselves and the business to the next level. So our job is to identify the skill, belief, and behavior that's missing and build it. Because skills, beliefs, and behaviors, they're all trainable. The ceiling you're hitting in your business is not in your business, it's in your brain. And I can give you hundreds of examples about this. Let me talk to you about Lara Costa. Lara Costa is the founder of Literally Academy and Clio. And we worked together in late 2023. She came to us, burnout, on the verge of quitting her LinkedIn business. She was very successful on paper, a creator running a small agency that was consistently beating her revenue goals. But internally, she was collapsing. She was on the verge of burnout. She was operating as a freelancer, a creator, a CEO simultaneously with no system holding any of them together. And Our first conversation, I remember her first words to me. She told me, please fix me. I'm broken. I said, you're not broken. You are untrained. Like 99% of founders out there. Now, her execution gap was very obvious. Tasks kept piling up. Decisions deferred, days bleeding into each other, but her capacity gap was invisible. Turns out her chronotype was misaligned with her calendar. Her energy curve peaked during the hours she spent in meetings. The cognitive load of holding the three roles, the freelancer, the creator, the CEO, was exceeding her trained bandwidth. And she didn't have a missing skill. She was able to deliver, but she could not sustain the rhythm her business required. And obviously didn't give her a motivation routine. We diagnosed her chronotype, time blocked her calendar the right way, understood the actual energy curves, and prescribed one specific module from the protocol stack. She implemented it, I remember, within 3 days. 2 weeks later, that impending sense of burnout was gone. And about 2 months later, she got her first 150K launch of her career, which I think was roughly double what she had forecast for the launch. Now, since then, she's been named Forbes of 30 under 30, built 2 companies and scaled into the millions. And the shift wasn't more discipline. She didn't get smarter. She was already disciplined and smart. What changed was finally understanding her biology was trainable and get a system that worked for her to actually help her show up at peak capacity every single day. And that's exactly what you need to break through. Now, your question might be, if the capacity gap is the thing to solve, how do we solve it? Well, there's a very simple equation that governs it. Capacity minus friction equals execution. Capacity is your trained bandwidth to execute. At a conscious level, the thinking brain, and a subconscious level, the emotional brain, and at a somatic level, the nervous system. Capacity is trainable through neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to rewire itself to expand its capacity. Every elite domain has known this for decades. Now, what is friction? Friction is everything that pulls capacity below its trained ceiling. Internal friction, like limiting beliefs, unresolved decision, unmet psychological need or physiological needs, or external friction, chaotic calendar, no system, wrong team, wrong work, wrong environment. Execution is what's left over when capacity exceeds friction. The bandwidth available to do the hardest, most ambiguous, highest leverage thing on your list. When capacity exceeds friction, the brain has bandwidth left for execution. When friction exceeds capacity, the brain reroutes either onto 1, avoiding work entirely, or 2, easy, familiar, low-leverage work that feels like progress. I call this second mode grinding. And it's the most dangerous state in business because from the inside, it's indistinguishable from execution. In fact, grinding feels like winning, but it isn't. So consistent execution is the predicted output of an equation that has gone positive. Grinding is the predicted output of an equation that with random bursts of capacity exceed friction. So you get things done, but not the right thing. And avoidance is the predicted output of an equation that's gone negative. And sports physiology has been developing rigorous training methodologies around a variation of this equation for over 40 years. The vocabulary changes by field. What doesn't change is the equation. What never existed until now, until this moment, is the founder's application for the highest leverage job a founder can have, which is solving the next bottleneck in business. Every behavior you can't explain to yourself, the call you keep avoiding, the obsessive optimization of the thing that doesn't matter, has a mechanical explanation. You're either lacking capacity to tackle it, or you're drowning in friction. If friction is structural and capacity is untrained, the equation runs negative indefinitely. So that's why you're stuck. And you're not stuck, you don't fail on a dramatic sense. You just keep grinding on things that don't matter or avoiding the hard work until you typically quit when friction becomes unbearable. The 90% failure rate in business within 10 years isn't a mystery. It is the predicted output of an untrained brain trying to hold an equation that was always going to break because capacity was never trained. Because you can be the hyper capable, but if you direct it to the wrong thing, you still get nothing. That's the part most founders miss. Because even if you train your capacity, even if you build your discipline and literally go all in becoming the most capable CEO you can be, but then you aim it at busy work, you're not going to get anywhere. Because every business at any given moment is limited by one binding constraint, one bottleneck, one problem that if solved, moves the entire system forward. And effort directed anywhere else is by definition wasted. Cannot move the business because the business isn't constrained by it. The bottleneck isn't typically the most urgent thing. It is not the thing with the most Slack notification. And it's certainly not the thing that you feel like doing. It's the hardest, ugliest, most ambiguous problem sitting in your business right now. The one that typically has no playbook. The one you'd pay someone else to solve if you could, but you can because it is your responsibility to solve it. And what's worse is that the bottleneck evolves as you grow. At 20K a month, typically the bottleneck is outreach. At 100K a month, typically the bottleneck is hiring. If 100K a month, typically the bottleneck is another offer or launching a new channel. At 1 million a month, typically is setting a new direction for the company, restructuring it. And above that, at 10 million a month, it may be time to find a new CEO for your business. Elite founders train their capacity to attack the bottleneck, not just identifying it, because identifying it, if you're smart, is kind of easy, isn't it? You can name the bottleneck in your business right now. Give it a thought. Like, what is the thing that if solved would make everything else easy or irrelevant? That's the bottleneck. Now, attacking is the work that takes the training because that's your job. In fact, it's the only job that matters because every time you crack a bottleneck, the business changes shape almost overnight because you finally pointed your capacity at the thing that was holding the system back all along. In fact, Mark Zuckerberg said that the number one job he had was to work on the most important thing. His job is to make sure the bottleneck is being addressed. Now, if capacity points to the bottleneck, what points capacity away from the bottleneck? Well, easy. Friction. Friction does not enter randomly. It enters through 5 specific domains. Every drain on capacity in every founder, in every business comes through one of these. Pillar number 1 is spiritual. It's everything that relates to values misalignment, lack of meaning, disconnection from purpose, not feeling aligned with your business. It's the friction of running hard in a direction you ultimately don't feel like yours. It's when you grind in service of a goal you no longer believe in. Spiritual friction is invisible until burnout. Now, there's a second pillar, which is mental. And that's what pertains to limiting beliefs, identity conflicts, unresolved cognitive loops, the friction of arguing with yourself before you can do what needs to be done. It is every doubt, every indecision, every self-sabotage. It is knowing what you need to be doing but not doing it because you don't feel worthy of it. Is when you know you need to fire an underperformer but spend 3 months ready to get into decision. In essence, mental friction is self-debate. Then we can have physical friction, which is very simple. Sleep debt, hormonal dysregulation, chronic inflammation. It is the friction of trying to think clearly through a body that's exhausted or undernourished. This is the founder running on 6 hours of broken sleep, wondering why his thinking feels foggy. Well, it's not foggy because the thinking is hard. It's foggy because the brain is exhausted. It isn't ready to think clearly. Then we have strategic friction. Strategic friction is unclear goals, no system, no prioritization, and decision debt that compounds. It's the friction of not knowing what the bottleneck is or knowing it and not being able to systematically attack it and prioritize it. It's the founder with 12 tabs open and no idea which one to close first. That's the friction of running a business without a clear map of where you're going. And finally, executive friction, which is about weak delegation, constant context switching, poor follow through. It is the friction of starting but not finishing, the gap between intention and action. And it's the most expensive friction because it's very obvious to the founder. Now, those 5 domains of friction eventually come back to that equation. When you feel you've wasted your day, one of the 5 sources of friction was loaded and the equation went negative. Maybe you spent your whole day grinding or avoiding, but you certainly did not execute. For a spiritual, mental, physiological, strategic, or executive reason, it doesn't matter. The point is that you didn't do what you needed to do. And that equation, capacity minus friction equals execution, produces 3 possible modes of work. Mode 1 is avoidance. This is procrastination. It's when the engine of your business is off, when your calendar is empty or full of meetings that don't matter, when you lose hours to Instagram, to email, to news, to AI chatbots, to researching the thing instead of actually doing it. Now, this is easy to spot, is easy to admit. In fact, most founders catch themselves in avoidance within a few minutes and feel bad about it. But the problem is that they do it again because the brain is not ready to lock in out of avoidance. Mode 2 is grinding. This is when you have your engine in your business screaming, You're applying force, you're getting things done, but the car is barely moving. Why? Because you're not working on the bottleneck. You're not working on the most important thing. You might be very active, logging hours, but the revenue is not moving up. And this is what kills businesses, because it feels from the inside identical to execution. You end the day exhausted, just the same, but you didn't do the most important thing. That's why I say grinding is the most dangerous state in business. Because avoidance at least feels bad. The bad feeling is a signal that something's wrong. Grinding feels like winning. That is a lying feeling. Grinding is not winning. Grinding is losing in slow-mo. This is where most founders go wrong. Working extremely hard on the things that don't matter because they don't have the capacity to execute on the most important thing. This is a 70-hour week that should have been a 30-hour week if your brain had the capacity to shy away from distractions and execute the highest leverage work. This is the 6-month launch I had that could have been a 1-month launch. Where Slam right now, we have no time. That has been the answer of most strategic plays you could have run in the past 3 years. Grinding is what happens when capacity is built enough to do work, but not enough to do the right work. So you burn the capacity on the next easiest thing and call it execution, even if it's not. And mode 3, which is the only one that matters, is execution. This is when the brain can sustain the work, when you have force applied exactly what matters, when you can hold for hours, days, weeks, years working on the next bottleneck. Is when you can get the hardest thing on your list done the first thing in the morning, and because you've trained your brain and nervous system to make it the path of least resistance. You don't feel like grinding. You don't feel like avoiding. You feel like you're winning because suddenly the work you were avoiding got cheap. Not because the work itself got cheap, but because you became the kind of founder that completes everything. This is the state almost no founder has trained for. Like my estimate is most founders spend 5 or 10% of the week executing, 70% in grinding, and 10 to 25% in avoiding. They think that 70% is actual execution, but it's not. They're really executing very little of their time. And the question that separates a founder who builds something real from the founder who spends a decade trying to build something real is the question that every time you sit down, you should be asking, the same one Zuckerberg famously said. The question I ask myself almost every day is, am I doing the most important thing I could be doing? That question, answered honestly every day of your business life, is the entire difference between being stuck and scaling all the way to financial freedom. Now, the highest cost of doing business with an untrained brain is not the time you waste on grinding and avoiding. It's the founder task. The founder task is the daily hours extracted from your life by work that looked like executing but was actually grinding or avoiding. It's a measurable number and it actually compounds. Let me show you what it costs. The average founder we start working with comes to me paying between a 30 and 50% founder task. That means that 3 to 5 hours of every 10-hour workday are spent on work that didn't need to be done, couldn't move the needle, or should have been delegated for a fraction of what their time is worth. I remember a very smart client I had in London in the beginning called Shahid Shodan. Sharp founder, young family, scaling his first startup. And the first thing he said in our case study was, in his own words, my effectiveness was maybe 30 to 40% every day, and I didn't realize it. Almost half the time I was technically at work, I was doing stuff that didn't need to be done or could have been outsourced for a fraction of what my time is worth. A lot of the work just didn't need to be done. That's what a 40% founder task looks like on a smart, hardworking founder. And once we trained his brain and nervous system, he scaled to 7 figures and exited within 18 months. So run the math on yourself, because this happens to every smart founder we work with. If you work 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, and you're paying a conservative 30% founder tax, that's 3 hours a day, 15 hours a week, 750 hours a year. In hours alone, it's almost 5 months of full-time work, disappearing every year on things that ultimately matter very little, because they're not the bottleneck. They disappear into work that feels productive but produce nothing. That's the daily cost, but it gets worse. Now extend the math, because the highest cost of grinding isn't the opportunity cost of not capturing your full potential as a founder. It is wasting your life in the process. A 30% founder task compounds over 7 years, the time it typically takes a serious founder to either build the company they wanted or quietly give up on it. 7 years of paying the tax is roughly 5,000 hours lost. 2.5 years of full-time work managed with nothing or very little to show for them. That's a founder task over 7 years. 5,000 hours that produce little to no compounding because it wasn't pointed at anything that would actually compound. But the hours wasted aren't the worst part. The worst part is something else entirely. It's how those hours train your brain for the wrong thing. Because when you spend years grinding on work that doesn't compound, your brain learns that work doesn't produce results. There's a disconnect between inputs and outputs. You learn that effort is disconnected from the outcome. So you learn to expect wasting that 30 to 50% founder task. You expect motion without progress, and that patterns over time deepens because your brain gets better at producing that founder task. And after enough years of this, you arrive at a state that's worse than being stuck. You arrive at what I call the hollow grind. The hollow grind is the burnout adjacent state of having been grinding for years while believing you were executing, only to know deep inside that you wasted most of those years. It's the founder who's been stuck at 40K a month for 12 months and is not sure why. It's the founder running an agency that should have been 5 million a year plus, but still below 1 million. It's the founder who could have exited and didn't because every quarter the work felt important, but none of it actually was. It's the company that should have been 10 times the size it is right now. The life you could have built inside and outside business, but you didn't or couldn't do it because you were too busy grinding on things that did not move the needle because you still lack the capacity to tackle the bottleneck. That's the hollow grind. There's no morning you wake up and know you've crossed into it. It's just quieter than that. It's the alarm at 6 a.m., the half second before you open your eyes when you already feel tired. Not from yesterday, but from the day that hasn't even begun yet. It's sitting across your partner at dinner and they ask how work went and you say busy, good, because the real answer will take an hour and you just don't have the words or the capacity to deal with it. That's the hollow grind. That's when your nervous system is doing the math on another week of executing on things that ultimately don't compound. And don't get me wrong, you can still look successful. Revenue can still come in. Nobody's worried about you except yourself because you know the truth. Inside, you know the exact size of the gap between where you were supposed to be and what you actually end up. Now, the good news is the hollow grind is not a verdict on you. It's a predictive output of an untrained operator running an equation that was always going to break, which means this is not an inevitability of the universe, not a character flaw. It's a mechanism to fix. Now, if you don't fix it, you're quietly accepting that tax, that grind as a ceiling on your identity, your business, and your life, until you eventually decide to quit your business. Because entrepreneurs do not fail, entrepreneurs quit. They concede the follow grind. They quietly accept that this is the ceiling and the slow conversion of an ambitious founder into a stock operator running a smaller version of the company they once imagined. That's where the 90% affiliate rate in business comes from. It doesn't come from market forces. It comes from the follow grind, sustained over years, caused by founder tax, which is the daily penalty that creates it. And every time you pay the task, every time you avoid the work or you grind on what doesn't matter, you train your brain to think that your job as a founder is grinding. But there's a way out. But it does not involve more effort. It involves understanding how to avoid the hollow grind by retraining your brain. You already intuited some version of this before you opened this video. You knew your clarity, focus, self-belief, consistency weren't what they needed to be. You know there's a gap between what you could do and what your business demands. You've known it for years. And you've also been trying to solve it with the wrong solutions, sold to you by the wrong industries. Here's why each of them fail you. The personal development industry sold you the experience of change instead of change itself. The books, the seminars, the conferences, the morning routine influencer you followed on Twitter or LinkedIn for a year, the mindset content, the journaling apps, the vision board complex, all of it traffics in motivation and identity as the intervention, when they're actually the consequence of a highly capable brain, not the cause. In other words, execution, motivation, success is an output of capacity. It's not an input to it. When your brain is trained, guess what happens? Motivation appears as a side effect. When the brain is untrained, no amount of motivational input produces sustained behavior change. Reading about habits doesn't change your basal ganglia, which is the part of the brain where habits live. Watching Goggins shout on camera doesn't rewire your stress response. Journaling about your goals doesn't change how your prefrontal cortex weights near-term effort against long-term rewards. Affirmations where you ask for things you don't deserve only makes you less prone to achieving them. The reason personal development feels like progress is that the dopamine of insight feels real in the moment. You finish the book, you have a moment of clarity, your nervous system releases a small reward signal, and you mistake the signal for the change. The book did its job, it gave you an idea. The brain stayed exactly where it was before. So you finish the book and nothing really changes because you keep grinding. You keep avoiding the bottleneck. The product failed because it was never built to work on the layer where the problem actually lived. And you may even have tried productivity systems, which also fail you because they try to do more with the bandwidth you have. You know, the Pomodoro industrial complex, the deep work people, whatever the current operating system you're using. Those are tools that organize capacity, not expand it. They assume the bandwidth exists, and the only problem is that you don't know how to allocate your bandwidth. But that's not the problem. The problem is a lack of bandwidth because by default, the brain lacks the capacity to manage a business. For the founder with excess brain capacity, productivity system can certainly be useful, but the average founder is untrained, which is why productivity systems end up just being noise. They give you a more elaborate way to track the work that we're going to do anyway. This creates a sense of organization that it compensates for poor execution. Now, the truth is, and the gurus will never tell you this, that a trained operator doesn't need a perfect system to perform. They just perform, and a perfect system can save on untrained operators. What I'm saying is, a Navy SEAL or a Delta Force operator can bring a knife to a gunfight and still win. That's who you want to be. Or coaching. Most business coaching works on strategy or for design, maybe mindset, maybe accountability. All four are valid. But again, they assume the operator running the business can execute on the prescription. If your ability to execute, if your capacity is where it needs to be, then coaching might work. The founder takes the advice and runs with it. But if your capacity is still below the prescription, it produces motion without progress. So you hire a coach, you get the playbook, you run the study for 2 weeks, you fall off, you blame yourself, and you hire a different guy. And the pattern repeats for years, if not decades. And accountability coaching has the same structure. It works while you're paying. It stopped working, guess what? The moment you stop paying. Because accountability is an external scaffold compensating for an internal capacity that was never built. The bottleneck is upstream of every coach you've ever hired. The pattern across all of these three failures is the same. Each industry sold a solution that operated on a layer that wasn't the bottleneck. Personal development worked on identity. Productivity worked on time allocation. Coaching worked on strategy. None of them worked on the trained biological capacity underneath all of it, your brain and nervous system. If you read 40 self-development books and you're still grinding 70 hours for output that doesn't match that effort, the product failed. It was never built to help you at the root. So stop looking for the book, stop looking for the course, and stop freezing yourself in cold showers and actually work on what matters. Choose the right category. You need to choose to work on your biology. Now, everything to this point has been diagnosis. Now, the solution. What should you be doing that you're not doing? If the brain is the bottleneck, how do we train it so that it stops being the bottleneck? And I mean trained it. I don't mean motivated. I don't mean discipline. I mean trained. In the same technical sense, an athlete trains with structured load, measurement, feedback, and periodization. And across 6 years plus of working with 400 plus founders, the system I've built runs on a track data-driven training architecture customized to each founder's profile. At the core of that architecture are 3 primary protocols. They account for roughly 80% of the transformation. The remaining 20% is the customization, the measurement, and the weekly recalibration. But those layers only work if the 3 core protocols are running underneath them. And I'm gonna tell you everything about them. Each one of these protocols targets a different neurological system. Each one builds or removes a specific input to the execution equation. Protocol number 1, I call it ring fencing. and it trains the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of the brain. Your prefrontal cortex is where strategy, focus, and decision-making live. It's also the first thing to go offline when you're stressed, fragmented, or sleep deprived. Ring fencing is a training protocol that trains it through 60 to 90-minute session with specific load, feedback, and recovery requirements. And this is distinct from mere deep work. A deep work session is when a person turns off notification and focuses for 90 minutes. Ring fence session takes that to the extreme. It's a periodized cognitive training repetition executed under specific physiological conditions, aimed at the bottleneck tasks, measured for output, and recalibrated weekly based on data. The structural difference lies between jogging and marathon training. Jogging being deep work, marathon training being ring fencing. Same activity, you're still running, but it's a total different mechanism and a total different outcome. Because ring fencing, what it does to build a capacity by creating the necessary conditions for neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to rewire itself. According to Michael Messernick research, it's focus, attention, edge of skill challenge, immediate feedback, and repetition. And a correctly designed ring fencing session is the only work format that produces all four simultaneously. And if you do it every day under the right load, it physically rewires the circuits responsible for focus. So execution stops being a fight and becomes the default. But it is not enough, because you need protocol number 2, which is recording, which trains the limbic system. The limbic system, roughly speaking, governs fear, urgency, the pull towards distraction, and the resistance you feel towards hard work. Left untrained, it overrides your prefrontal cortex dozens of times per day, and you don't even notice until you're 45 minutes deep in Slack. And that wasn't a conscious choice. It was the limbic system winning the fight before your prefrontal cortex had a chance to act. So recoding is a protocol that retrains the fight. The mechanism itself comes from a 70-year clinical lineage, building on the work of Joseph Wolpe, Edna Full, and many others. At the root is a conditioned avoidance response can be retrained through exposure under safety, meaning we apply the retraining logic typically used for anxiety, OCD, phobias to the specific structure of avoiding high leverage work. Self-development calls this mindset work and treats it as a belief update exercise. Wrong. This is about reframing the resistance, because the resistance isn't a belief, it's a conditioned somatic response with belief content layered on top. In other words, you can update the belief content anytime, but the somatic response, you being anxious and resisting the task, keeps firing. That's why journaling doesn't work for the founder who's been avoiding the same call for 6 months, because the pattern lives in the nervous system. Recoding works because it operates at the level of the nervous system. And it works because you recode it under stress when you are feeling the resistance. In essence, the retraining is somatic and behavioral, not just cognitive. The belief content gets updated as a downstream consequence. And here the supporting literature, if you're curious, is James Gross on emotion regulation, Cian Baylock on performance under pressure, and Daniel Cucciardi on mental toughness. When done consistently, it physically rewires the limbic associations that have been preventing your capacity gap from being addressed for years. And this is how ring fencing and recoding work on cognition and emotion. But this is still not enough. There's a third layer underneath. Protocol number 3 is called recovery, which is what trains the autonomic nervous system. Your autonomic nervous system is the infrastructure that runs both the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system. When it's dysregulated, broken sleep, chronic sympathetic activation, no parasympathetic recovery between sessions, neither of the systems above can perform. You can train ring fencing and recoding, but if your brain is exhausted, you'll still execute at 60%. Recovery, structured recovery, active recovery protocol prevents that. And the mechanism is really very simple. It's engineered automatic shifting of the nervous system. The protocol we train our clients with is built around those 3 layers: ring fencing, recoding, and recovery. And that is what allows our clients to consistently execute. And this goes beyond just self-care. No, this is actually physiological intervention that balance out the stress that comes from execution. So you execute in a way that is sustainable. Now, recovery, even if it's arguably the easiest protocol to implement, is also the one that is harder to get our clients to do, because they end up breaking their own rules. They work so hard, they cut sleep, they skip the deload, and then they assume they can compress the schedule because they feel fine. Because you don't feel the deficit immediately. The deficit shows 2 weeks later. So these are the top 3 protocols that we deploy to conscientiously and deliberately train the brain and nervous system to get better at consistent execution. Now, Ask yourself, where are you right now in the execution equation? Look at the last 7 days honestly. Think it through for a minute. One of these three things is true. One, you know what to do to break through, but you're not doing it. If this is you, you are what I call friction dominant. Your capacity is partially built. You have the skills, the beliefs, and the ability to execute what your business needs. Yet, you cannot do it. Even if you've done the work to know how to do the work, friction is overwhelming your capacity. The day starts and the right task never get touched. The bottleneck sits there on the third straight week. You end up the day exhausted and aware that you didn't move that needle. The intervention here is to reduce friction. Find which of the 5 domains is loading the hottest and address it before adding more capacity. 2, you don't know what to do or you can't sustain it under the conditions of your business. Well, that is a capacity dominant, meaning even under perfect conditions, the cognitive load required to perform at your business current stage exceeds what your brain has been trained to handle. The bottleneck task doesn't just feel hard, it is hard for your current brain, regardless of how much friction you remove. This is the founder who knows in principle they need to lead the team, but they don't yet have the trained leadership skills. They know they need to do a bunch of things, they yet don't know how to do them. So the capacity is not there yet. The intervention, therefore, is very simple. Is find the specific skills, beliefs, and behaviors that are not yet trained and train them and do it in a deliberate way over days and weeks. And the third problem might be that you're just too exhausted to even try. You are approaching burnout. That means that both are broken. Probably your capacity is unbuilt, and for sure, friction is uncontrolled. If you're here, days feel scattered, the effort goes in, but very little compounds, and every week you feel like you're starting over. This is when you've been grinding so long that you've stopped tracking whether anything is improving. At this point, brain and nervous system are cooked to the point that even diagnosing where to start feels impossible. Here, the first intervention really is recovery. You can't train a brain that is exhausted. First, you rest and recover, and then you train it. Now, whichever of the 3 axes you're in, the universal mechanism is the same. Expand capacity, reduce friction. The diagnosis tells us where to start. The protocol is built around all 3, but the sequence depends on where you are right now with your business and what have you been training before. It absolutely has to be customized. Now, there's 2 ways to get consistent execution going. We already discussed that. Raise capacity and reduce friction. 3 protocols do the work, and they're universal. Now, the implementation of those 3 protocols is not universal. The version of ring fencing that works for an agency founder with 3 young kids and an inconsistent ops layer is not the version that works for a SaaS founder operating solo with a stable revenue stream. Why? Because the friction sources are different. The cognitive load profiles are different. The recovery thresholds are different. The available windows of protected time, you guessed it, are different. The version of recording that dissolves the avoidance of firing in a 7-figure e-com founder is not the version that dissolves the freeze around premium pricing in a 6-figure consultant. The somatic, the brain, the nervous system signature of that resistance is different. The condition association underneath it is also different. So we have to calibrate the intervention for each one of you. And conversely, the version of recovery that restores a founder running on 5 hours of broken sleep is not the version that restores a founder who already sleeps 8 hours but has 0 exercise going for them. The intervention obviously targets entirely different physiological deficits. So that's why some of the off-the-shelf protocols that you may have got from books or courses or videos haven't worked for you, because they were not tailored to your specific situation. Which is why we always recommend that whoever you work with, you always start with a comprehensive diagnostic across all domains. In our methodology, we have the 5 domains I discussed previously. That diagnostic is what tells us where friction is loading, where capacity sitting sits, and what we need to be deploying first to make sure you get to the next level. From there, we build the specific ring fencing schedule, recovery architecture, and recording target. And what we recommend everybody does, and you should do too, is to have an end of week review in which you look at your own data and adjust before the next holiday. And in our experience, it's 4 to 6 weeks until the equation goes structurally positive, and after that it's just compounding. Now, there's a story that I like a lot. Let me tell you about Carlos Charre. He called me in 2022. He was working a marketing job that paid him roughly $3,000 a month. He had spent the previous 4 years and $40,000 trying to start a business. Let me say that again. He had invested $40,000 in courses over the course of 4 years and got $0 in return. He bought those courses in order to start his own business. He paid for coaches, he joined masterminds, he developed his entrepreneurial skills, sales and marketing, to the point that he was working on Jay Abrams' team, one of the most recognized direct response operators alive. He had elite skills in sales and marketing. He had elite knowledge. He had access to elite networks. By every visible metric, he should have been crushing it. And he was very smart too, and a great person, great character. He had everything going for him to succeed, but he couldn't. In his own words, it wasn't that the programs didn't work. It was that I had an execution problem. I would just fail to do the work. That's the key insight. I would just fail. That sentence is the entire summary of this video. He did not have a strategy gap. He didn't have a knowledge gap. He didn't have a network gap. The guy was crazy smart, crazy skilled, and was working with Jay Abrams. He had an execution gap. His brain couldn't convert what he knew how to do into actual effort to build his business. And he was blaming himself for being unable to do that. So when we ran the diagnostic across the 5 friction domains, the picture was very clear. He was absolutely exhausted. His sleep was all over the place. He would hit snooze every morning without exceptions. His glucose was volatile because he didn't have a structured nutrition. He had no morning protocol, no evening protocol, no recovery rhythm anywhere in his week. So he procrastinated like crazy. He couldn't focus on more than 10 minutes, certainly not on his own business. He was burning 3 or more hours every day on vices he used to numb the frustration of not executing. I'm talking Instagram, dating apps, food, anything that took the edge of the fact that he had spent another day avoiding or grinding. And that created friction on the mental layer. He consciously wanted success, like everybody. Unconsciously, he feared failure more than he wanted it. In other words, his emotional brain had been writing checks, I want to be successful, that his thinking brain couldn't cash for 4 years. And every attempt to push through with discipline had only reinforced the pattern of avoidance. The diagnosis told us where to start, and it wasn't where Carlos expected, because we did nothing about his business. We started with the easiest but most profound fix, the sleep. He thought it was strange. He had come to me to scale a business, and the first 3 weeks of our work were spent rebuilding his physical performance. A sleep window, wake up time, go to bed time, no phone, nutrition protocol that stabilizes glucose, hydration protocol that stabilizes hydration levels, meditation 5 times a week to start dialing down the limbic overactivation that produces anxiety, and Oura ring to measure whether any of this was actually changing his physiology. We started taking care of him like the athlete he was and had forgotten he was. And what was happening is we were raising his capacity ceiling before asking him to do the work that had been failing for 4 years. The brain had to be capable of withstanding the friction of running the business. Every previous program he'd built reversed the order. It loaded him with strategy and things to do instead of actually taking care of the underlying brain and nervous system. That's why it failed every time. And every time it failed, Carlos concluded he was the problem. Now, he was not the problem. He was just untrained. So as soon as we started training his capacity obviously went up. Through recovery work, we stabilized his nervous system. Then we layered ring fencing with 2 protected work sessions per day on the actual bottleneck for his business. First was offer creation and then outreach. And he couldn't first really execute much on day 1, but within 2 weeks, he was already putting in 2 ring fence sessions, sometimes 3 on top of his job. And every time resistance came up, and a lot of resistance came up when he sat down to do outreach and felt the familiar pull to our Instagram or refrigerator or the dating app or whatever, we used that recording to make sure he still focused on what needed to happen. And it worked. It literally recorded the association he had between outreach and fear of failure. Every time he recorded that pattern, every time he sent more DMs, the limbic system weakened the avoidance pattern and strengthened the executive override, meaning he got better at becoming better. He got better at execution. And this didn't happen because he suddenly became more disciplined or smarter or better in marketing, but because he finally had a brain that is going for him, not against him. Now, on month 0, when he joined, he was at $3,000 a month in salary. 4 years and $40,000 of failed entrepreneurship behind him. No business ever launched and sleeping poorly. And within 3 months, he had launched a business in partnership with a fitness influencer. He had a first client roughly doing 10K a month in collected cash. His sleep was going up, vice were going down, capacity was being built consistently, and within 4 more months, so month 7 since we started working together, he hit 100K a month in collected revenue. He had even a small team, and I think it was 80 clients back then. Same person, same skill, same product category, same market, same dude, exactly as smart as he was in the beginning. He did not break through because he suddenly became someone he wasn't, but because he got out of his own way. He reduced all the friction in his life, he built his capacity, and he executed like we taught him. That's what he needed. And that's probably what you also need too. Now, I'm not saying that this is the only thing that matters. No, strategy matters, offer matters, timing matters, team matters. But strategy, timing, team, those get executed based on your brain. And if your brain is untrained, the brain, by definition, is a bottleneck. Train the brain, and the work you've been unable to do for years now suddenly becomes the work that is fun and exciting, and you complete it before lunch. Now, here's what separates what we do from most of what you may have been sold. Everything we do is falsifiable because we track it. The first thing we give our clients is a dashboard. And if the protocol is not working, if ring fencing, recoding, and recovery is not working, well, the data shows it. And it shows it day on day, but also week on week. And we pride ourselves in having perfectly benchmarked each one of our clients and understand what are the things they specifically need to get that next level. Most personal development isn't built that way. It's built on books that make you feel different but then change nothing. It's based on unfalsifiable interventions of questionable science, and certainly they're never tracked with data, because you can't train what you don't measure. That's why you can spend a decade on self-development and still have no evidence that any of it has changed your brain or affected you in any measurable way, because you never measured, and what doesn't get measured doesn't get improved. Those interventions are built to be consumed. They're mostly entertainment. They're not transformational. At intake, every founder gets a baseline diagnostic across the 5 friction domains. This is what we call the founder score, execution score. And it shows us where friction is loading or the capacity ceiling sits today, where the bottleneck is at the brain level, not the business level. And the score tells us where to start. It also tells us whether the work we do is what the founder actually needs, because again, as we said, not every founder is a candidate. Not every founder needs the same thing. If the primary constraint is market a business model, well, the diagnostic will catch it and will say so. But if it isn't, from baseline, we track 5 specific things across the engagement. One is what we call high leverage hours, or bottleneck hours, time spent each day on the actual bottleneck. Not meetings, not email, not grinding. The single variable that most directly correlates with revenue. Then, how long is your deep work session? Sustained attention capacity is being built through ring fencing. So typically we see founders being able to focus for 10 minutes. They take that up to 90 minutes many times a day. Then we also calculate the founder tax, the estimated daily hours lost to work that needed to be done, to avoidance and to grinding. Then we also measure capacity markers, sleep duration, quality, metacognition, emotional hiccups, procrastination, self-doubt, all sorts of emotional flare-ups that might compromise execution. And finally, and this is very important, compounding roadmap momentum. See, the goal to execute high leverage work is to actually get to the next level. So we measure how fast we're moving towards that next level. And that variable is important because the most dangerous failure mode is a founder beautifully grinding into oblivion. Work hours going up, focus be high, and the business still not moving because the founder was working on the wrong thing. So we make sure that is never the case. And that feedback loop is built on those 5 variables. And we see it when ring fencing is working. You can see the bottleneck hours rise and the session length compounding. When recording is working, the avoidance pattern and data weaken, so you can see less and less emotional flare-ups and more consistent execution. And when recovery is working, session quality remains consistent throughout the week rather than degrading. When the equation is structurally positive, all 5 trends move in the same direction. Now, when the execution is breaking, well, you guessed it, the data shows within days, not months, and we adjust before it compounds. That's very important because those feedback loops are the core driver of improvement in our program and really in every elite sport performance. So after 6 years training founders in many capacities at all levels of business. Those who consistently execute with this protocol for at least 12 weeks, consistent 12 weeks, we see a median revenue lift of 2.7 times revenue. Not the case, that's median, right? Half of the cohort outperforms this. 90% of our clients that run it for 12 weeks hit 2 times revenue or better. 90%. And deep work capacity, and this is very exciting, multiplies by 4.5x, measured as uninterrupted high cognitive output minutes per week. In terms of time reclaimed, and this is also very important, they save between 10 and 15 hours per week, right? So we are giving them back 15 hours per week that they were previously wasting in avoidance and grinding. And there's 3 more outcomes founders self-report within 12 weeks of consistent execution. 90% of the founders self-report that burnout is gone if they happen to have it. 52% report that procrastination is gone, and 72% report that self-doubt is gone. Now, these are obviously subjective, but we collect them because subjective experience is part of what the protocol changes, but we clearly marked them as self-reported. Now, what happened when you consistently build your capacity every single day while at the same time removing friction? Well, execution is no longer a rare event. The default network becomes execution. You just sit down and do the thing. You are never in your own way anymore. Every single day, you do the thing. Not occasionally, every single day. And that recurring daily state is what I call effortless execution. It's observable. It's when high leverage hours rise, deep work session length compounds, and emotional flare-ups are minimized to the point that founder tax trends towards 0. Every single variable we track runs positive. You're calm, collected, and in control, working on the hardest thing with a smile. And it's measurable. It's not a feeling, it's not a vibe, it's something we can track with a dashboard. That effortless execution state that pretty much guarantees success because you're always working on the most important thing at maximum capacity shows up in the data. That's the most important thing you can do with your business. Becoming the kind of founder that consistently closes that capacity gap to the point that execution becomes a natural byproduct of being the absolute best version of yourself. And the beauty of this is that there's a transformational component to it. Because if you consistently execute for at least 3 months, at some point you realize that you start naturally gravitating towards the hardest thing you were previously avoided. You find out that you have no more doubts. You find out that you get joy from working hard. And you don't feel heroic, you feel ordinary. That's the point. That's who you are now. The work that once required willpower and a heavy dose of nicotine or caffeine, you just do it by default. What used to take 3 days to decide now takes 20 minutes. The work that took 3 days now takes less than 1. The team feels the change before you do, and they stop bringing you small things because they're no longer the bottleneck for them. That's effortless execution. The identity that develops from it is what I call an elite founder. And that elite founder is not a personality tribe. It's not a privilege of having been born with the right brain or with the right access to the right networks with the right amount of money. No, it isn't just the reward of a personal transformation arc. It's the predicted output of an equation held positive long enough to compound applied to a brain trained for the job. Remember the athletes and the special operators we talked about. They don't reach the elite status by talent or greed alone. They reach it by training with data under stress for years. The elite founder is the same. It's what happens when a founder is trained the exact same way. But it doesn't take years. It takes weeks. And the word elite is not a flex, it's a category. It's the highest echelon of an operator in any performance domain. And that's the goal that you should be aspiring to. That's the destination. Because once you get to that status, success is just a matter of time, not chance. So you came in believing execution is a God-given gift, a function of motivation, discipline, and mindset just a few have. Well, now you're living with a totally different model. Execution is the output of a biological equation. Capacity is the substrate. Friction is the load. And your job as a founder is to train your brain and nervous system so that you can run your business at peak capacity. And then steward them daily for as long as you need for the business to compound. Everything else is downstream of your ability to train the best brain and nervous system. 3 industries sold you the wrong fix. The strategy lie told you that the answer for you getting unstuck is having a better playbook. The hustle lie told you that you need to outwork everybody. You now know you need to outperform them. And the mindset lie told you to fix your beliefs. All of those 3 are aimed at the wrong layer. The answer was always and would always be biological. It's a brain and nervous system problem. And that's a great thing because they both can be trained. So carry this with you. Every business is founder constraint. You are the limit of your business. Capacity minus friction equals execution. Motivation, discipline, having a great mindset is not an input to capacity, it's the output of it. Train your capacity and all the self-development things you want naturally happen. Grinding feels like winning, but it isn't, so you must avoid it. Also, remember, entrepreneurs don't fail, they quit. Keep in mind that you're never weak or broken, you're just untrained. And that your job is to find a constraint, attack the constraint, and then find the next one. Because in the end, your execution ceiling is your revenue ceiling. This is what I want you to remember from this video. All of these are testable against your own week. So ask yourself, how much execution have you had in the past week? Because my protocol tells you that that is the most important thing. And I honestly believe that if you train your brain to consistently get the right things done, you will forever be successful. And at some point right now, you have 2 paths in front of you. Path number 1 is that you close this video and nothing changes, which, to be honest, is the most likely thing, because that's what typically happens the last several times you felt this exact spark of recognition. 6 months from now, you're probably going to be in the same revenue, maybe a tad higher, but you're still going to be grinding just as hard, wasting your potential just as much, accumulating a founder task that is leading you to the hollow grind. And that is still, again, the real cost. Because a few months from now, or a few years from now, you'll wake up to the fact that there was a better way to build the business and life you wanted. That is training your brain for consistent execution. Path 2 is simple. You take the founder score, which takes 2 minutes, and link is below. No call required. That score is going to give you 3 things. First, a single score of how much of your day is real high leverage work versus managed avoidance. A breakdown of the biggest leaks right now, and a plain English estimate of how much revenue your under execution is costing you each month. If your problem is a market or business model, it will also catch it. And if you're a candidate for my work, my team will reach out with an engagement looks like for your specific profile. But the most important thing for me is that you understand this true fact. You cannot succeed in business if the most important tool in your arsenal, your brain, is working against you. Because every time you sit down, one question will separate those founders who eventually succeed and those who stay stuck for however many more years or decades. Is asking, am I the bottleneck or am I not? Am I working on the most important thing or am I grinding and avoiding? That question, answer honestly every day for the next months and years in your life, is the entire difference between a life well lived or a life well wasted. And it all hinges on your ability to understand that the ultimate bottleneck to the life you want to live is inside your skull. So train your brain and nervous system and see your performance and execution shoot up, your capacity expand, your friction go down, and your goals finally happen. Welcome to the channel. See you in the next video.